Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Pong.
Good. Well, there was a interview that the White House granted to Breitbart yesterday. Mm-hmm. And he, for some reason, didn't go to CNN. So I would have to suggest that this is not fake news. This is probably legitimate stuff, but it's not so reassuring to us who believe that we should have a different type of foreign policy. The subject is foreign policy, and the revelation by a national security individual that works for an assistant for the president, Sebastian Gorka. Mm-hmm. And he is revealing a national security strategy, a new one, which they do periodically. So this really caught our attention. Just yesterday, they talked about it. Which way are they going to go? Or are they going to come our way and be non-interventionist? But, you know, it was strange. They throw a lot of terms around in here, but I don't think he used the word non-intervention. He did some broad brushes in this change or this new strategy. He says he doesn't want to be like a neocon, you know. And there's a suggestion in between the lines here that the one complaint was that so far the intervention wasn't so bad. It's just that we didn't stay long enough. But they lumped the other end of the spectrum into one category, and that's those extremists. Those right-wing extremists, those libertarians, and those isolationists, all together. But, you know, I'm sure this is very, very serious because this is the intellectuals now expressing themselves. And so far from what I read, I'm not excited except for one thing. It almost looks like they have to try to attack us, not for our serious discussion about why we should be less involved overseas, but for them to go to the extreme of modifying things a little bit and then putting us in the corner of extremism, you know. And of course, I've always argued that the extremists are in governments, you know, the ones who run up debt and spend the money and print the money and fight all these useless wars. That to me is extremism. But anyway, we're labeled extremists, so I hope you don't feel badly this morning because of that.
I do. I feel terrified. But Gorka is deputy assistant to the president in the office of the chief strategist. In this interview, I read it yesterday. I started out being optimistic. He said, these last 30 years of thinking have just been unimaginative. This doesn't serve the U.S. purpose. This is a stale way of thinking. And I thought, he's come our way on interventionism. We've been intervening everywhere over the last 30 years. We've not repurposed the United States globally since the end of the Cold War, which we should have done. Obviously, we should have gotten rid of NATO and all of these things. We haven't made these changes. I thought, this is great. He's coming our way. But instead, he sort of constructs a straw man argument that you've got these horrible neoconservatives over here, and then you have these horrible isolationists over here. They've both dominated the debate for 30 years. We're going to come up with something brand new. We're going to put new wine in old bottles.
Well, I think the individuals who are in charge, and I've always suggested strongly that the difference in foreign policy between the two parties is not all that much. And when you see putting on sanctions like we have recently, it's very, very bipartisan. So they come along now and they say this is going to be different, but they end up doing very much the same thing over and over again. And I think what it's representing, and this is a bipartisan concern, is that I think they're concerned that the empire is under threat, that we're not as secure as we used to be. Financially, we're not as secure. They're not sure what's going to happen to the empire, not because there's a strong disagreement on policy with Trump, but because he doesn't manage things as diplomatically as those neocons would want, this sort of thing, that they're worried, I think, and justifiably so. They should be worried about the empire. And I think that's why they had to throw in the non-interventionist libertarians, but they wouldn't even use the word non-intervention. That is way too soft. We had to be called extremists. But I think the empire is under attack, and they specifically say that the goal of this new strategy will be to protect American lives, American prosperities, and American interests overseas. So they have a goal, and of course that's always what we're doing. We always go because we are the exceptionalists, and and they want to emphasize this new strategy. They don't want to emphasize occupation, but as much as influence and helping people. And before it was always couched in terms of we're in Afghanistan to protect American liberties, to protect our Constitution, all that nonsense. And so, but they never hesitate to say, we must protect American interests, which, when you translate that, is we got to protect the source of our natural resources. And of course, Trump hasn't been bashful about that. I'll go in there, we'll take care of them, we won't occupy, we won't be nation builders, we'll make them pay for it, we'll take their oil, that kind of thing. So I think that this is a variation of the realist approach. But I think the pure realist of H.W. Bush probably was less threatening than this realist, supposedly realist approach, which leans much closer to a modified neoconservative policy.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at some of the clues that he gave us in the interview as to what it would focus on, it shows that they still don't understand why things aren't working out overseas, why our policy is producing such backlash, such blowback. He says one of the new aspects of this new national security strategy is to recognize globally dispersed totalitarian ideology of jihadism. That's the top threat.
Any place, anytime.
So it's all of the jihadists. But there were no jihadists in Iraq until we went in. There were no jihadists in Libya until we went in. There were no jihadists in Syria, or very few, before we went in and started giving them weapons. So they never understand the underlying cause of this. They just want to go and hit it and attack it.
The suggestion by one of these planners was that they have to devise a policy to fit the president, and the president is Make America Great Again. So they're taking this and putting it into words that will coincide with, Trump's theme, Make America Great Again. So McMaster's, the national security advisor, hired out somebody by the name of Nadia Shadlow, and I think we mentioned her name yesterday. And she is actually the one that's going to draft this national security function, strategy. Yeah. So I think she's key. I think what we're hearing now are the people who are justifying the so-called intellectuals are putting the ammunition that the generals can hide behind, and the politicians in Washington, the people Republicans and Democrats, who vote endlessly for huge budgets. The budget, even though they don't claim that the DOD budget is $1 trillion, but when you add up everything is $1 trillion, and most of it just gets us into more trouble financially and as far as security goes. So, but her job is to draw up this strategy. So I don't think with her background we should expect very much. I don't think she's going to come and interview us on, or come be on our show.
Well, that is interesting. We did mention her, the Maxwell article in the American Conservative yesterday. He mentioned her, and I think it is important. I think she's Gorka's boss, if the way I look at the ladder there. But what did she do before she went there? She was close to McMaster. When McMaster became National Security Advisor, he reached out to people like Shadlow, who have a solid neocon background. She was a program manager for the Smith Richardson Foundation. And this is part of what we talk about a lot on the show, is this network of think tanks that fuel Washington's ideology. And they're all neoconservative. They all are hyper-interventionists. And so she was the money bags for these. She's the one that kept these institutions full of cash, writing the articles about how we got to go after this guy, we got to go after that guy. So what happens when Trump gets in? He names him McMaster, and McMaster reaches out to all these people, and then they put him in all these positions, and then you hear something like, well, we're not going to have a neocon foreign policy. We're not going to do that. I think they realize that their brand is damaged.
Mm-hmm. There are some people who leaned in our direction, would try to make excuses and justification, to accept Trump, as a positive that he's going to disrupt things and make things better. But, when he does what we just see and appoints the people that we don't see as anywhere friendly toward what we're talking about, the big question, and I've mentioned this before, is it out of ignorance that he's just unsophisticated politically and academically? Or is this a strategy that he has, throw people here a few bones and bring the people in who might oppose him, and yet his ultimate plan is to do what he's doing, not change anything and just put different labels on it? Or, like others suppose, is maybe, the people in the deep state, they don't have control of the government, they don't have control of the CIA and the NSA, and nobody knows who really has the clout, and certainly they have the weapons of the media. So there's those things. I mean, this is, it doesn't change facts, but it does make you wonder what's behind this, why he does it and why he doesn't have a different policy and comes up with this concoction, which is absolutely more of the same. To me, it's another wolf in sheep's clothing. It's make it sound a little bit better. And like the neocons have done a pretty good job on making it sound better, because it certainly was hard to defend oneself. And we who took this position were painted, as unpatriotic, against the military, and not caring about American safety and American freedom and all these things. So the way this is painted is pretty important. So I don't think you or I will know exactly. I think it's good to know why they do it. If this was an ultimate plan, you go out and you say these things to this group and do something else, they'll forget what you said, or just say, well, Trump doesn't understand. He's never been in government. He doesn't know anything about foreign policy, and he's all over the place. Or whether or not there's this pressure behind the scenes.
Glenn Greenwald, I guess a couple weeks ago, did a great piece on how the neocons are moving back home in the Democratic Party, which they left in the early 70s. And I think what may be happening here, and this is something you've remarked upon a couple of times, the change, if there is one, is sort of a linguistic change. So the neocons, when they advocated an attack, an invasion of another country, they would always couch it in democratic terms. We're going to have democracies in the Middle East. We're going to liberate the women of Afghanistan. The neocons always couch it in these terms. And what may be happening here is a shift in terminology rather than in philosophy or ideology. We're not going to talk about democracy anymore. We're not going to talk about helping women overseas. We're just going to go in there and do it. It's for American interests, and that's it.
In a way, this might be making a point that we've argued would be the case, that they wouldn't be successful. And maybe this is an admission that, yes, they want to still protect American interests and American wealth and all these things, but maybe it's the outright admission that nation building is not an easy job. And the most difficult nation probably throughout history has been Afghanistan. You don't go into Afghanistan and remake that nation. I mean, they're not going to put up with it. But maybe this is the admission, and they have to at least change the terms, that they'll go in, they'll secure their resources or whatever they need and intimidate and maybe get an election here or there, and then they can rig the election and march on. But I think in many ways this is a sign that the empire is weakening, and that there's going to be more jobs like this. I don't believe this new strategy is new any way whatsoever. I think it's, changing the labels and changing the people's attitude to maybe accept it. And then the people who were really with Trump and then getting weak with Trump say, well, he's trying to make things different. But if he looks at some of the things that you mentioned here, these people who are involved and where they come from, how can they expect a different foreign policy? It's going to be the same. And then you see the votes. And you say, well, why don't you guys, you and I, why don't we just throw up our hands and forget about this, because we can't overcome it. But this is where I think people have to separate what they see in Washington, how Washington is run. That swamp is a swamp, but the American people aren't with it. I think the American people voted for Trump more because they thought he would do more like what we want. And there were a lot of people that were, friendly with us, that, hopeful. I was hopeful too. But I think the more we see here, the less likely that's going to be a difference. But I still think the principles of non-intervention, alive and well thought out, and it's not extremism. It's it is the right thing to do. It is compatible with American traditions, compatible with our Constitution. It's compatible with morality, and is compatible with the principle of why don't you talk to people before you start killing them? This sort of thing. So I think the American people are with us on that. And there was a time when we had no access to reach other people. And I think today we have more access, through programming like this. Our program is small, a few people, but just think of how many different programs like this, the different libertarian institutions that, put this information out. And that reminds me that we're reaching out, and I think that's one of the things we're going to do. We're going to have another conference in September for that sole purpose of spreading this message out and around those people who control what's going on in Washington.
And a lot of people say, why are you going to Washington with this conference, which, by the way, is on September 9th at the Washington Dulles Airport Marriott. RonPaulInstitute.org/conference. But they said, why are you going to Washington to do this? It's a small bit. But I think it has a symbolic importance that, we're also part of the process. We want a place at the table, and here's an alternative. And I think it's interesting because what Gorka does in this interview is sort of creates a straw man, as you alluded to, of non-interventionists as isolationist. And that must mean he's a little bit nervous about it, and they're a little nervous about it. But here's a quote that I think we should sort of wear as a badge of pride. In a way, he's frustrated with the extremists. You're forced into a binary world. Either you have to be a neoconservative, invade other countries, or you have to be a libertarian and say, who cares? We're going to be isolationists. That's
no, they think they're putting us down, but I think that builds up our credibility that they take the time to know there's a few of us out there talking about something else. And I am also convinced if you got rid of all the labels and you presented our case for what our policies would be versus looking at what there has been and looking in detail what is being proposed, I think 75–80% of the American people are going to be with us. The people who aren't are the ones who are controlling wealth and empire and military and spending, banking, finances, political power, and that's the people who want that. So it's not likely. Any summary that you'd like to put out there?
Well, I'm ready to throw up my hands and say, we're just going to be a non-interventionist, not isolationist.
Well, non-intervention is a great word, and I like to use the word non-intervention not only in foreign policy, I like to use it in all three spheres, on personal liberties, as well as economic liberties, as well as on foreign policy. Government should just stay out of our lives, out of our wallets, and out of our bedroom. And only one rule we have to follow is nobody's allowed to initiate force. That means you can't lie, cheat, steal, or kill. Wow, that's really difficult. But I'll tell you what, those simple little rules would certainly improve the world. It certainly would give us a chance for peace and prosperity. And I guess I'm foolish enough to believe there's a possibility we can move in that direction rather than just covering up the same old mistakes, changing the labels and saying it's something different and really producing exactly the same policy. We would like to really change policy. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.